The last one that we're going to talk about happened in West Virginia, and it's called the Battle of Blair Mountain. And this happened in 1921, and it was the largest labor uprising in U.S. history and the largest insurrection in U.S. history besides the Civil War. So how this went down was, in 1920, the United Mine Workers Association was starting to make a little bit of headway into West Virginia. The West Virginia coal mines did a really good job of keeping labor out. And they would do things like they would throw you out of your house, they would beat you up if you didn't act a certain way, throw you in jail, all kinds of different things to keep the unions out. Well, as the union started to gain traction, they sent the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency down to bust some heads and to kind of put the union uprising down. Now, there were several key players in this, but two of the main ones was a mayor by the name of Cabell Testerman. He was the mayor of Matewan, West Virginia, and the sheriff, who was named Sid Hatfield. So Sid Hatfield and Cabell Testerman met the Baldwin Felts detectives at the train station, and they told them that they weren't welcome in town and that they had to leave. Well, a gunfight ensued, and at the end of the day, 7 Baldwin Felts detectives were killed. Mayor Cabell Testerman was dead, and so were 2 miners. So they arrested Sheriff Hatfield, and they put him on trial for murder of the 7 Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. He was not convicted. He was not convicted of murder, so he beat the rap. So the mine companies decided that we had to do something with Sheriff Hatfield, because if not, the unions were going to really take hold. So they arrested him on other charges, and as he showed up for court to defend himself against the charges, the Baldwin Felts detectives were waiting for him on the courthouse steps, and they murdered him, shot him dead right then and there. But what happened was it actually had the opposite effect than what they were hoping for, because Sheriff Hatfield became a hero to between 10 and 15,000 striking miners in West Virginia. And what they did was they picked up their squirrel rifles and any rifle that they had, and they went to war with the U.S. Army, who was ordered down there to put that strike down. And this was really a compelling thing. And if you take a look at a copy of one of the newspaper headlines from the Washington Times, the first thing that you see is the Air Fleet was ordered to a West Virginia battlefield. This was the only time in U.S. history that our Air Force was used against its people. If you really pay attention to the year, well, we did fight a war on our country's home soil in the Civil War. They didn't have airplanes back then, and the only other time that we fought a war in our country was in Pearl Harbor. Other than that, the Air Fleet was ordered. The only time in U.S. history that our Air Force was used on its own people. Now, they didn't drop bombs on them. They used it for reconnaissance. But the mine companies actually hired aviators and private planes to come drop bombs on the striking workers, and they did that. And again, these striking workers were up against 3,000 regular Army troops that were ordered there to put down the strike. The battle lasted a month. And one of the really interesting things that came out of this was that, and maybe I misspoke when I said that the West Virginia miners picked up their squirrel hunting rifles and went, but if you pay attention to the year that this happened, it was 1921. A good majority of those coal miners were World War I veterans. So they knew something about military command. They knew something about command structure, supply lines, and how to fight a war. So but what they didn't have was uniforms. And so what the regular Army would do, and the Baldwin Felts detectives that were assisting the regular Army would do, was that they would change their clothes, dress like striking miners, and they could go into their camps, they could spy on them, they could murder them, they could infiltrate them. So what the striking miners did was they tied red bandanas around their necks, and they referred to themselves as rednecks. And that was when a new term in the American lexicon was born, was in 1921 during the Battle of Matewan. So the next time somebody calls somebody a redneck, make sure you correct them, because being a redneck is not a sign of being racist. It has nothing to do with being backwoods. It has nothing to do with sitting on your tractor and having your neck get sunburned. What it really has to do, it has to do with striking miners in West Virginia that stood up and went to war to try and have an 8-hour workday in a safe workplace. Because at the end of the day, that's where the term redneck was born. Moving forward into the 1930s. So they had this association called the Christian American Association, was founded in 1936. Well, the name sounds like it's something that everybody would want to join because it sounds harmless. What it really was the beginnings of right to work in the anti-union movement. The man that started this name was Vance Muse. And again, He started the Christian American Association to beat on labor unions. A quote from his grandson describes Vance Muse as a white supremacist, an anti-Semite, and a communist baiter. A man who beat on labor unions not on behalf of working people, as he said, but because he was paid to do so. Now, the Christian American Association fought several different things. One of the things that they sought to repeal was the woman's right to vote. He didn't think that women should vote. He also sought to repeal the 8-hour workday, and he also sought to repeal an amendment to the Constitution that prohibited child labor, because he was one of those guys that wanted to put the kids back to work on the railroads and in the mines because they had smaller hands and they could do stuff that full-grown workers couldn't do. He was also successful in 1944 in passing the first right-to-work laws in Arkansas and Florida. Now, decorum would prevent me from putting up some of the newspaper articles and the signs that he made, but I can say this much, that he made his case, because he was a racist, by arguing that right to work was essential to maintain the color line. I don't think that Vance Muse was a very good person. So, but it's not all bad news, because as we move forward and we get past World War II, workers really united to form the middle class and get a fair shake. And in the 50s, unions organized about 1 out of 3 non-farm workers. And if you figured everybody in, we had a big chunk of what the workforce was. Now, I believe that the reason why that we were so successful in the 50s really had to do with the fact that most of the workers that were in the 1950s were World War II veterans or Korean War veterans. And if there's any veterans that are watching this presentation, they know and they understand how important it is to have your brothers back. Because at the end of the day, that's what you have to do when you're in combat. That's what you have to do when you're in the service. And these guys understood that, and I think that's why unions prospered from the 50s into the 60s. But again, in 1968, the Right to Work Foundation was founded. Okay, and that's the modern Right to Work Foundation. And this, again, was to destroy unions through means other than killing people and beating them up. Now, they still had stuff like this that went on, but they were getting bad press from lighting people on fire on Greek Easter Sunday morning, or having people trampled to death at a Christmas party. So they decided to form this foundation, and it led to other right-to-work movements and other groups like the Heritage Foundation, which I got to give them their props for their names. They come up with great names for stuff. The Americans for Tax Reform, the Center for Worker Freedom. These are all anti-union groups that are designed to break us apart. At the end of the day, there's a lot more that workers have in common than they do that splits us apart. The things that we have in common: we want to have a job. We want to have a secure job where we know that that job's going to be there for us. We want to come home from work at the end of the day. We want a safe workplace. And we want respect and a say-so on what happens on the job. The way that you get respect is you make enough of a good living that you can take care of your family. Maybe you can take them for a week's vacation camping, or to the beach, or to Disney, or wherever it is that you want to take them. Maybe you can afford to give them a good holiday season. Maybe you can afford to put a kid through school. Again, you just want to have respect on the job, and you get that through making a living wage. And maybe you want to be able to put a kid through college. Maybe you should be able to have enough money to be able to afford to do that, and at the end of the day, retire in dignity. Because all we really want to have is a good job that's there for you, respect on the job, and making enough money to take care of your family, a safe place, and a good and decent retirement. Those are the things that bind us together. The anti-work movement does things to try and rip us apart. They use race. They use age. They use which bathroom you can use. They use who you can marry. They use all these different kind of things to try and split us up as workers, because when we stick together and we show solidarity, that's when we can affect change and we can push back and make a difference. But as long as they're trying to divide us, and it's BS, it's called behavioral science, it's done on purpose to try and keep us apart, because when we get together, we can push back. And we've had a success in doing that. We just learned about some of it.